reason why we're all obese is actually not primarily because of the foods. It's actually because we are cut off from the natural cycles of life. And then second of all, because we're cut off from the correct proportion of life.
Today's episode, we are discussing how hormone imbalance could be the root of all obesity.
You know, the completely mainstream perspective is that you're eating too much and you're exercising too little and you should just force yourself to eat less, move more, and you will lose weight. But when I work with people, I see that they come in specific, distinct patterns as to they can't lose weight. And what I realized is that those patterns stopping them losing weight usually correlate with some kind of hormonal imbalance. For the people who I find who just can't lose weight no matter how little they eat, thyroid often seems to be the thing behind it. If none of the other hormones implicated and you are just fairly old and you just have this stubborn fat that won't go, then we might check your IGF-1 levels, which is usually what you check to see the growth hormone levels. DHEA tends to be more of a muscle increaser, whereas cortisol, again, long-term, tends to be more of a fat increaser. The more fat cells you have in the body, the more that they produce estrogen. And then the more estrogen that you have, the more that your whole metabolism is shifted into a fat cell producing state.
Hello and welcome to the Rejuvenate podcast. I'm your host, Kruse Hawks, and I'm here with my co-host, Elwin Robinson, the creator and founder of Genetic Insights and the author of the Rejuvenate Blueprint. And always lovely listeners, thank you so much for joining us here. We're developing quite a lovely community, so it's great to be a part of this with you. Today's episode, we are discussing obesity and how hormone imbalance could be the root of all obesity. So tell me, Elwin, what hormones are we going to go through? How are we going to unpack this episode? And what are our lovely listeners going to discover today?
Yeah, so I've been working with more and more people to help them lose weight. And so actually I hadn't for the first vast majority of my career, so I never really looked into it for that reason. But I have been recently, the last few years. And it's interesting, the completely mainstream perspective, right, is that it's just you're eating too much and you're exercising too little and you should just force yourself to eat less, sometimes eat differently and move more and you will lose weight. And there is some truth to this because both of those actions will have an impact on all kinds of other systems in the body, including the hormones. But when I actually look at it, when I work with people, I see that they come in specific, distinct patterns as to they can't lose weight. So, and what I realized is that those patterns stopping them losing weight usually correlate with some kind of hormonal imbalance or hormonal challenge, let's just say. And when a person tries to force improvements via willpower, it doesn't work. Now, the other thing is that these days there's a lot of talk about how maybe the obesity epidemic is as a result of us being mass poisoned. That's something that I am seeing a lot. And I think there is definitely some truth to that, a lot of truth to that. So one of the ones that's talked about a lot is seed oils. Talked a lot about in my community for many years, but actually now being talked about in the mainstream. And by people like RFK Jr., who's supposed to be, at the time of filming, about to be in charge of all the health agencies in the US, and who was, for instance, commenting how McDonald's should start using something other than seed oils, right? So this is become something that's just about started to go mainstream. But what is the problem with seed oils, right? Why are they something that can cause weight gain? And there's a couple of theories around that. One of them is that they're just inflammatory, but that doesn't fully explain it to me. Another one is that Ray Peat has explained very thoroughly, and Ray Peat, of course, to give him credit, was one of the first people who talked about the dangers of seed oils back many decades ago. Ray Peat talked about how it impacts thyroid function, and so is the problem large amounts of seed oils in the diet, and so is the problem the seed oils per se, or is it the impact they have on thyroid function? Is that why some people don't have a problem with seed oils? Because despite the seed oils, their thyroid still works okay, Or I think Ray Peat also talked about how seed oils, omega-6s, have an impact on estrogen. So, and then, lack of movement, what impact does that have on different hormonal systems of the body, like, for instance, insulin, if you're not moving enough. So when I actually get to it, you can work on all kinds of levels. And yes, you can work on the level of simply cleaning up your diet, eating better, and exercising more. But this training is for people who've really tried that and it hasn't worked. And it could be for one of several reasons. And I'll go through them and then I'll be answering your question, Chrissy. So for the people who I find who just can't lose weight no matter how little they eat, they are able through discipline to force themselves to not eat. They are able through discipline to force themselves to work out, and they still don't really lose weight. Thyroid often seems to be the thing behind it. And so a low thyroid will cause weight gain by at least two mechanisms. One of them is that it will make you hold on to water weight more, edema. And another one is that it will slow down your metabolism so that your body is burning less fuel, so that to some degree, depending on how severe it is, no matter how little you eat, it's still too much in terms of some of it, your body still will store as fat because the metabolism is burning so slowly. So thyroid is one of them. That will show up in not any particular place in the body, but generally as kind of puffiness and water retention is the most obvious sign of that. Then there's insulin, right? In case if someone has the weight, especially around their midsection, so this most obviously belly, but to be honest, also like the love handles, even some people complain about lower back fat. This is like a classic manifestation of insulin resistance. And so again, insulin resistance could be caused by various dietary factors, obviously, most obviously, but also lack of exercise, as we talked about. And we'll go into these in more detail. I'm giving the intro here. But so that could be a reason why nothing seems to work. Other people tend to hold on to weight, especially around more the upper thighs, buttocks, and sometimes around the arms as well. And there's also kind of a tendency for maybe water weight. And so that could be more of an estrogen thing as to what's going on there. The person may have excessive levels of estrogen that's causing them to not be able to lose weight no matter what they do. It could be an issue where the person has the kind of more classic why they can't lose weight, which is that they can't stop eating, right? This is some people, they keep snacking between meals. Now, that could also be related to insulin, to be honest. If you're insulin resistant, then that can actually cause more of a glucose roller coaster that can make you snack more frequently. But the classic, not just snacker, but the classic overeater, the person who just doesn't stop eating. And obviously sometimes this can come in phases, like your willpower stops you doing that for a while, but when the real willpower runs out, maybe you go right back to it. The person with the bottomless hole in their stomach, I would say that is more to do with the hormone leptin and leptin resistance specifically. And that's one that probably people are least familiar with. So we're going to do that last. And hopefully, the majority of the episode will be about that, but we'll cover all the other hormones first. Growth hormone is another one. That I wouldn't say I see a classic type for it, but it's just that I suppose I'm just getting older type of weight gain when there's nothing else very specific along the lines of anything else that I've said. Growth hormone, it just does get much lower as you get older. And so, let's say if you're 60 or something and you start taking growth hormone or some kind of growth hormone, secreting peptides or something like that, like ipamorelin, that can make a difference in that case, or do activities that increase it, fasting and sauna, hot saunas and all that kind of stuff. And then, then there's also cortisol. So cortisol again tends to cause both water weight gain. I would say with cortisol, it's a much more generalized fat gain throughout the body. So it's a combination of water weight and fat weight. So distinction between cortisol and thyroid and how I'm describing it, it's not massively different, to be honest. Like there's a bloatedness to both of them potentially, but a difference that you might have experimentally experienced, and often they go together. So someone with high cortisol often does have an underactive thyroid if they high cortisol is long term. However, one practical difference would be that a high cortisol person will tend to be warm a lot of the time, or even overly warm, hot, whereas a classic if thyroid is the main issue, then you tend to be cold a lot of the time. So that's one way you can potentially distinguish between the two. And so if you feel like you fit into one of those types, or maybe even some combination of those types, there may well be a hormonal basis of what's going on. And that's not to say that lifestyle changes won't still work, because lifestyle changes and dietary changes can change all those hormones, potentially. Yeah, no, we did cover them all, I think. But it does mean that it could explain why lifestyle changes aren't enough if the hormonal imbalances or the hormonal resistance are too much. And so then we can look at, well, are there other interventions that are more specific to those hormones? And this is something that I'm kind of excited to share about, because for many, many years, I think almost 10 years now, one of my business partners has been saying, God, it'd be really great if we could develop a supplement for weight loss. And I've always said, there are no supplements for weight loss that actually work. The only ones that kind of work are really like a nutritional version of the diet pills that people used to take in the 60s. So 60s and 70s. So in the 60s and 70s, a lot of people would just take amphetamines or amphetamine analogs. And this drives the stress chemicals really high: adrenaline, cortisol, noradrenaline, but and dopamine as well. And when all of those are very high, including especially dopamine, which is in the case when you take those amphetamines, then your appetite is very, very low. So despite the cortisol being high, you tend not to put on weight. You tend to lose weight because you're just eating so little. Now, this creates loads of other problems. This is not a wise way of trying to lose weight. And the modern equivalent to that is to use stimulants that are not amphetamines, but, like caffeine, for instance. So one of the only kind of proven kind of supplement interventions that really works to help you lose weight might be like a really high dose caffeine with a bunch of other kind of stimulants in there. And that will help you lose weight because it suppresses the appetite so much because of the adrenergic and dopaminergic quality of it. But that's also overstimulating your adrenal glands. You're going to be on a roller coaster depending on all kinds of other factors. You may be able to get away with that for a long time, but eventually the dopamine will start to collapse, and even the adrenaline will start to go down. The cortisol will still be high, and then you'll actually gain a lot of weight. And that's often what we see with people with very long-term high stimulant use to try and lose weight. It works until it doesn't anymore, and then a person's in such a bad state because by having their stress chemicals so high for so long, they've also suppressed their thyroid. They've probably messed with some of the other hormones that we talked about. They probably increased their estrogen. So yeah, there can be lots of knock-on consequences to it. So that's the only supplement that I have been aware of that actually really works. I didn't want to do that to people.
No,
So I
of
said,
course, because like you're saying, it works, but it has too much of a detrimental effect. It's not, in the long run, the payoff is not there, because you're just gonna put yourself in a worse position than when you started.
yes, yes. But when I realized the hormonal basis of a lot of these challenges that people have losing weight who are trying to do the minimum stuff, and then especially when I discovered about leptin and started experimenting with specific, targeted interventions, which can potentially help with leptin resistance, I've been surprised at how effective they actually are, as we'll talk about. And so I'm like, so actually a combination of different interventions that help to optimize these different hormones does actually seem to be very effective. And I especially want to bring this to the world now, at least the portion of the world who's interested in hearing it, because of the GLP-1 agonist kind of ubiquity. So GLP-1, it it's reducing appetite, which leptin is also capable. Optimizing leptin is also capable of doing. Optimizing insulin is capable of doing to some degree. It's not the other ones. I mean, optimizing growth hormone will actually increase appetite. Optimizing thyroid will actually increase appetite. But at least in the case of optimizing leptin and insulin resistance, it will reduce appetite, but it's reducing it in a healthy way. Whereas, in the case of leptin, just by turning on the sensitivity to the hormone that tells you you're satiated, it literally tells you, I'm full, I don't need to eat. So the GLP-1s are kind of doing that in a cheating way. They're slowing the gastric motility so much that you feel full because literally your stomach isn't emptying, as opposed to you feel full because you're actually satiated, which is a crucial distinction. because feeling satiated, there are no significant drawbacks to, other than maybe if you're already nutritionally deficient, you'll become even more nutritionally deficient because you're eating less. That's always potentially a problem, which is why I've talked about that quite a lot in the last few episodes. But it doesn't have the much more, to me, potentially alarming challenge of slowing down the gastric process that GLP-1 agonists do, which potentially can lead to, pancreatitis and SIBO and all kinds of, very serious consequences, gastritis, et cetera, et cetera. All these serious consequences which can develop as a result of the gastric emptying and the gastric motility being too slow. The GLP-1 agonists, I guess they're just cheating. That's the bottom line. They're making the stomach, it's not that different from a lap band surgery. It's making your stomach literally feel full, not metaphorically, for longer. But it's not actually addressing, any of the underlying root hormonal causes, as far as I'm concerned.
Somebody, if they are taking that GLP-1 agonist, will they need to stay on it forever to maintain their state?
Yeah, I've heard conflicting things about that. The research actually says yes, Chrissy. So that's the obvious answer. I know anecdotally some people say, I just did it for a while. It helped me eat less. And then I stopped and I was able to maintain it. And I think I think I just said this, I'm not sure when this will come out, but in the episode that I did recently with Dr. Miriam, I talked about this as well. If we go back to the episode that we did about the Korean types for a second, we talked about how there are different body types out there. Some people have bigger stomachs, some people have smaller stomachs, some people have bigger livers, some people have smaller livers, some people have longer intestines, some people have shorter intestines, etc. I do think there is a certain type that tends to have a big stomach that produces a lot of stomach acid that has very fast gastric motility, just genetically, because there's always that variance, there's always a spectrum. And so the people who have that tendency, who are just like always hungry and whose stomachs can kind of pretty much digest anything without any problems, that kind of person, a little bit of a GLP-1 agonist just to slow it down enough to bring it back down to a normal average level may make sense. So that's my position. I'm not as hardcore against GLP-1 agonists in all cases, although when I discussed it with Dr. Miriam, we talked about dosages, and she said she would give like 0.05 grams as opposed to the 0.25 grams that is the normal starting dose for people. Often people take a lot more than that. That's of semaglutide, the most popular ones. So basically I'm saying like a tiny bit compared to what is usually given in some people could be helpful. And I think that explains why some people do use it. They do lose weight. They don't have any negative effects. But again, so far, one of my test subjects has gone from GLP-1 agonist to leptin sensitizer, has found that the leptin sensitizer are actually more effective while having no risk of side effects. And it's a pill rather than needing to be injected. So it's a win-win-win on every level, basically. So that's kind of where I'm at with it all. I'm not dead against GLP-1 agonist anymore, but I still just think that a leptin sensitizer is a better option for that like excessive appetite challenge. And so I want to get something out there. So I partly want to share about, all of these interventions because I would like you, the viewer or listener, to try them and tell me what happens. We can all kind of crowdsource this ultimate weight loss formula together if you are willing to try with me. Some things may well be things that you've already tried before and they may have worked or they may not have out of the things that we talk about today. But of course, the key part of it is that you're only as strong as your weakest link, and also you're only as thin as your most dysfunctional of the 6 hormones that we're talking about today. So you may be very good in most levels, you may be more healthy than most people your age, but if one of them just happens to be, quite imbalanced, that could still be the reason why maybe you're obese or you struggle to lose weight.
Okay, so looking at this list, I mean, I know you went through thyroid, insulin, cortisol really quickly. Remind me if we need to touch on estrogen or growth hormone before we get into leptin.
Well, let's go through all of them in a little bit more detail.
Yeah, let's go with thyroid. I mean, that's, number one right up there. We've talked a lot about it in the past, and we know how important it is.
Thyroid is in charge of telling your mitochondria, the energy factories inside of almost every cell, except for red blood cells, how much energy to make and it's the rate at which fuel is consumed. I guess that's the relevant part of thyroid from a obesity point of view. So the less thyroid hormone, specifically T3, that you have going into cells, telling them to increase. So the level of T3 is kind of like the gas pedal. The more T3, the more it's pressing on the gas. The less T3, the less it's pushing on the gas, or accelerator for my non-American friends. And so if you have a low level of T3, not a level that your doctor thinks is a problem, but low, just in the reference range, let's just actually say if it's not near the top of the reference range, which is really what we want for optimal levels of metabolism, then that means that there is not an optimal amount of signal going to your mitochondria telling it to burn more fuel. It's really as simple as that from a weight loss point of view. Now, there are a significant minority, maybe 20-25% of people who have a thyroid issue who are not overweight. They actually have an opposite problem where they tend to be underweight. But I'm not going to get into that because we covered that in the thyroid episode. I'm really just going to talk about obesity and being overweight in this episode. So in terms of obesity, that's how thyroid really has an impact. And in terms of what causes problems with the thyroid, there could be a few things. Again, I cover it in detail on the episode on the thyroid, but just in a nutshell, as I already covered, stress is a big one. High stress will block that. High stress will block the process of that ready active T3 getting to the core of the cell. Let's just put it that way. Another thing that will block that process from happening is a lack of certain nutrients, well-known ones, especially being iodine, which the T3 is actually made out of, as well as tyrosine, an amino acid that the T3 is actually made out of. But selenium is also important. Iron is also important. Zinc is also important. And then there's a bunch of others that are not as directly important, but are still important. And B vitamins, most of the B vitamins and magnesium would definitely be in that category. So lack of any of those nutrients could cause a problem. Toxins could be a problem in terms of the T3 getting into the cells in general. Pretty much any toxin can get in the way of that. But the most likely culprits for toxins that really mess with the thyroid is the ones that actually ruin the thyroid itself, and that's the halogens. So that's fluoride, bromide, and chlorine are the ones that are common. So yeah, chlorine, like the stuff in pools, fluoride, like the stuff in toothpaste, and bromide is something that they put in a lot of stuff, like especially bread. So any of those things could be in your thyroid, stopping your thyroid working well, but any toxin could potentially do it. And then, of course, because these are not isolated things, there's this delicate interplay. Any of the other hormonal imbalances that we're going to talk about, especially the cortisol one, can also mess with the level of thyroid. But those are some of the biggest factors that will stop the thyroid working correctly.
Right. Okay. And so I think you've kind of really already addressed it of actually saying, like, how does this hormone pertain to obesity and why is it important for us to pay attention to it? Is like you said, that it tells the mitochondria how much energy to produce. And if it's producing so little energy, then one, we're not going to have energy to move. And two, our mitochondria, our powerhouses, are just not going to be able to do anything.
Yeah, that's actually a different point than what I said, but
Okay.
that's absolutely accurate as well. Yes, the less energy we have, the less energy we have to move. So there is that vicious circle. But what I was saying more is it tells this mitochondria what rate to burn fuel, right? So the faster it's burning fuel, the more fuel you can have before you have too much fuel, which your body turns into fat.
Right.
That's
Right,
the
right,
other
right.
element of it. But what you just said is what I normally say. But in this one, I said the one related more to obesity. But they're both true and they're both relevant. You're right. Yeah. When you have less energy, you move less, or let's put it this way: the only way you can get yourself to move is by running stress. And then when you do that, that actually creates a problem. First of all, potentially with high cortisol. Second of all, with blocking the thyroid hormone even more. So yes, very, very true.
Right, yeah. So it's essentially a rate limiter. If you're not allowed to burn that much fuel, then forget it.
Yeah. And you have the energy to move. Yep.
Genetic Insights provides cutting-edge, affordable DNA testing, giving you access to over 500 health reports that can help you in 3 key ways. They may be able to resolve your existing health challenges even when nothing else has worked. Using simple lifestyle changes, their reports can help you reduce your risk of developing future health challenges that you may be genetically predisposed to. And they can help you feel more confident in your health by showing you where you are genetically strong. Unlike most other genetic health testing companies, Genetic Insights tests over 83 million different variations in your genes, guaranteeing 99.7% accuracy across all of their DNA reports. They cover almost every aspect of health, including digestive issues, cardiovascular health, weight loss, hormonal and blood sugar balance, as well as nutrient needs, allergies and intolerances, and so much more. Using their system is quick and easy, and reading the reports is simple. If you've done an Ancestry DNA test, you can simply download your raw DNA data, upload it to the Genetic Insights platform, and within a few hours you will have access to genetic reports which give you a risk score for each specific issue and scientifically validated recommendations based on your individual genetic profile. Everything in your reports are based on scientific studies, and there are citation links throughout every report. If you are serious about optimizing your health and wellness and feeling great, then getting access to your Genetic Insights reports may be the most important health investment you will ever make. In the reports, not only will you gain insights into how to overcome existing health challenges and avoid future issues, you'll also discover which types of dietary, lifestyle, and even supplement protocols are best for your unique genetics. To get your unique genetic health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and use code Rejuvenate to get 20% off today. That's geneticinsights.co using coupon code Rejuvenate to get 20% off today.
So in terms of interventions for that, we've talked about that in detail in different episodes. So there's a Wilson's temperature syndrome episode, and there's the hypothyroidism episode. So really look into that. But, I've already given clues, right? Is there nutrients missing? Giving your body enough of those will work. Is there toxins getting in the way? Dealing with those will help. Is there stress causing it? Dealing with that will help. So, all of that stuff. And if none of that stuff is doable, or if none of it works, then you can supplement your body. You can give it some thyroid. And the argument about whether that's a good idea or not, I won't get into here. I covered that in previous episodes. But it's not something that, even if you do it, it's not something you have to do forever. That's a myth that we dispel in the episode on Wilson's temperature syndrome. And also to say that a lot of people who want to lose weight, yes, a lot of the time, they take great, models, celebrities, athletes, anyone to whom their appearance or their lack of fat is a crucial determinant as to their success. A lot of them, yes, they will take things like growth hormone. If they're men, they might take testosterone. But a lot of people actually, they also take thyroid. People don't really realize that, but it is something that a lot of people looking to optimize take, not because they have a medical level of hypothyroidism, but just because they're trying to actually optimize their weight. So this isn't only our weird corner of the internet who talks about this. Is, I guess, the point I'm making. This is actually quite common among those where optimizing makes a big, big difference to their bottom line, right? Whether they make $5 million or $10 million this year, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a big key incentive. I mean, I know you talked about some of those natural ways, especially in those episodes that you described. And also, too, if there's somebody's looking for supplementation or medication, do check out those episodes. They are very, very, very key and informative. And I'll make sure I'll put the links to those in the description below. Our next hormone that we're looking at is cortisol in relation to DHEA.
Yes. So cortisol is a catabolic hormone, and DHEA is an anabolic hormone. And so catabolic means to break down, anabolic means to build up. So you'd think, just on the surface, that having high cortisol and low DHEA would be good when it comes to weight loss. But actually the exact opposite turns out to be true. Cortisol is catabolic, short to medium term. It's not. So anabolic generally means building up muscle tissue as opposed to fat. Sometimes the word anabolic is used for estrogen, even though it's a fat builder, which is kind of a little bit confusing. But anyway, so DHEA tends to be more of a muscle increaser, whereas cortisol, again, long-term, tends to be more of a fat increaser, and also a water weight increaser as well, because it's the effect of aldosterone, which is another adrenal hormone. Cortisol is an adrenal hormone that means that a person tends to hold on to salt, and then the body will also hold on to more water. So there's a few reasons why people hold on to water weight. But cortisol is definitely, potentially one of them. And so cortisol is elevated in the face of stress. Um, I've heard different takes on this. I don't think cortisol is necessarily a hormone that makes you stressed, like makes you feel stressed, as much as something like adrenaline or noradrenaline. Those are the things that really do make you feel stressed, which kind of makes sense, which is why if you use like a cortisone cream to raise your cortisol, you don't necessarily have a panic attack or like feel all weird or have your heart race. Whereas if you have an injection of norepinephrine or adrenaline, like in the case of, that Pulp Fiction movie or whatever, like to resuscitate yourself, or, in the case of a bee sting or if you have a tooth extracted, they often give you a shot of adrenaline. You can feel your heart racing, like you can feel this jitteriness. So I would say experientially, it's really more adrenaline than noradrenaline do it. But cortisol is kind of like essentially more your coping with stress hormone, but it always correlates with stress. That's the bottom line. So if you have stress, you're almost certainly going to have cortisol. The exception to that actually is when you've had really high stress for a really long time, and then you actually get what some people call adrenal fatigue, where the cortisol then actually is lower. But anyway, generally, when it comes to weight loss and cortisol, what we're looking at usually is high levels of cortisol and high levels of cortisol in relation to DHEA. Because again, DHEA will be more of a turning fuel into muscle process, and cortisol will be more of a turning fuel into fat process. So long-term stress causes cortisol, always correlates with cortisol. And so obviously doing the steps necessary to get stress under control and reduce stress are important. Also, if you're taking what is often called steroids given to you by a doctor, as opposed to, say, anabolic steroids. So anabolic steroids are normally like things that have a similar effect to testosterone. But steroids, like they give you for inflammation and allergies and autoimmunity and all that kind of thing, usually what they're talking about is cortisone. They're talking about cortisol. So if you're taking steroid medication, that can absolutely be a reason why you can't lose weight, no matter what else you do. So that's something that, or if you're taking medication that increases cortisol significantly, or if you're doing activities that increase cortisol significantly, those can all be things that are like a bottleneck as to why things aren't working, as to why you aren't getting better. So making sure that you come off those in a healthy, practitioner-supported way would be a key step of getting out of obesity, if that is a factor for you. And then if not, then again, we did a whole episode on stress that we'd probably refer people to as to how to reduce cortisol. Just kind of simple things, so I'm not leaving people hanging totally. There are various things that have been shown to be effective to reduce cortisol. One of them is ashwagandha. Another one is phosphatidylserine, L-theanine as well, although it doesn't work in it directly. And then, some of the herbs like lemon balm, passion flower, those kind of things have all been shown to be, reasonably effective at reducing cortisol, but they're not going to make a massive dent if you are taking cortisol, for instance, like in large amounts as a medication. So, but I have seen them be effective at high doses in people who have top of the reference range cortisol, or maybe a little bit over the reference range cortisol for natural reasons. Then those kind of herbal nutritional interventions can be significant. And in terms of what causes high cortisol, I refer to Rejuvenate Blueprint. It's always the same thing: genetic factors, nutritional factors, toxins, lifestyle factors, other hormones, emotional issues, traumas, structural issues, maybe if you have chronic tension in certain areas of your body, infections even, if you have a chronic infection, everything that can stress you out can potentially raise cortisol.
Really good. And again, everybody, I'll put the description below, the links to those episodes so you won't miss out. So our next hormone that we are looking at is estrogen in relation to progesterone or testosterone.
So in the same way that we want cortisol, like DHEA reasonably high in relation to cortisol, and that is a sign of youth. And in fact, when cortisol is high in relation to DHEA, that is generally a marker of being older, and it is a marker of having a higher risk for all kinds of other diseases. And in fact, it's a mortality marker. So it's a big deal. So the estrogen to progesterone if you're a woman, or the estrogen to testosterone if you're a man, although both sexes do have both hormones, both men and women have both progesterone and testosterone, but especially estrogen to progesterone for women, estrogen to testosterone for men is a challenge. Occasionally, estrogen can get too low. In women, estrogen can get too low. That's kind of what the menopause is, that both the sex hormones, estrogen and progesterone, both get too low. And for men, the only reason estrogen is going to get too low is probably if they are messing with their hormones, with anabolic steroids and stuff like that. And basically, estrogen is a bit of a vicious circle when it comes to obesity, because the more fat cells you have in the body, the more that they produce estrogen. And then the more estrogen that you have, the more that your whole metabolism is shifted into a fat cell producing state. And high estrogen tends to correlate with the other things that we talked about so far. High estrogen tends to correlate with low thyroid. High estrogen tends to correlate with high cortisol, especially. So I am not a believer that estrogen is all bad. I think for women, obviously, it serves an essential purpose for menstruation. For their menstrual cycle and pregnancy. That's a key point I wanted to make. But it even has some mood benefits. If it's very low, it can cause mood problems in men and women. The whole thing about the bone density is a bit like, not everyone agrees on it, but it may have a factor in there. For men, when their estrogen gets too low, they often lose their sex drive or even develop erectile dysfunction. Again, it tends to only happen as a result of abusing, other hormones, but it just shows that it can get too low. Absolutely. So it can get too low. However, in most people, the problem is that it's too high. And there's a bit of a epidemic of this. Probably the Bible on explaining this is a book called Estrogen Dominance, which I would recommend anyone who thinks this may be a problem for them would read. It is a hormone that leads to like female sexual characteristics to some degree. So, for instance, there are studies that show that when they do like an amalgam of a face of women who are at the highest estrogen point of their cycle versus the lowest estrogen point of their cycle, respondents considered the highest estrogen part of the cycle to be distinctly more attractive. So a lot of feminine traits like curvy hips and all that kind of stuff, actually, estrogen plays a big part in that. It's just that if you have too much estrogen, you have too much of that, right? So for a woman, if you had no estrogen, you wouldn't have curvy hips. They would be straight like a man. But of course, if you have too much estrogen, maybe you have too much of a curve, right? Which a lot of women, don't like. So it's just a question of balance, right? It's finding the right level. In terms of what can cause estrogen dominance, it's a lot of the same stuff that we've talked about already. So stress is a big one. All steroid hormones start off as cholesterol. And so from cholesterol, then they get converted into pregnenolone. From there, they get converted to various things, including DHEA, progesterone, and cortisol. And so the more inflamed you are and the more stressed you are, the more that there is a conversion to cortisol and estrogen, and the less there is a conversion to some of the probably more desirable hormones, like high levels of DHEA, high levels of testosterone for men, higher levels of progesterone for women and maybe men as well. So that's a big factor. There's the vicious circle thing that we talked about. Another factor is that there are a lot of xenoestrogens, man-made estrogens in our food, in our water, in plastics that we wear, plastics that we store our food in, plastics that we have our water in. That contributes significantly to the estrogen dominance situation. And I think there's an episode where we talked about this in much more detail, Kruse, so we'll link to that. I won't go into it fully again, but so those are some of, the crucial things. that we would want to address. In terms of simple interventions, again, I'm a fan of calcium D-glucarate. This is something that your body makes itself. It is something that you can find in food. Apples, I think, is the number one source. So there's as much glucuric acid, which is basically the stuff that detoxifies estrogen, in one apple as like one capsule of the supplement. So, and there are some other foods as well, which are pretty high. So if you're not a fan of supplements, there are definitely some foods that help to support the detoxification of estrogen. I should just actually bring that up. So the more your liver is struggling to detoxify in general, the more it's probably going to struggle to detoxify estrogen specifically as well. So usually on a practical level, someone who has high levels of estrogen, like a functional medicine type of doctor, will work on supporting the detoxification pathways in general, supporting the liver, and that often, helps. I've absolutely seen again and again that when people do that, when they support detoxification, often when they add some extra glucarate, either supplementing or with food, that it knocks that estrogen level down. We can see it happening in tests. It is pretty effective. In terms of, there's lifestyle factors, just all the usual stuff about being healthy, getting enough sleep, all of that stuff. But essentially, I would focus on stress and detoxification as like the primary things to keep those estrogen levels to an optimal level as opposed to too high.
Yeah, and that book, looking at estrogen dominance, and we did an episode with Dr. Michael Platt as well, and so definitely check those out. Again, all links will be in the description, but it's definitely something to look at.
Yeah, he was another person who agreed. He felt there was no redeeming qualities to estrogen. Don't 100% agree with it, but given how damaging it can be, because it's not just fat that it grows, it also grows the kind of cells that can kill you, right? The C word. So in a lot of, not every type of C word, but a lot of different types. So there's a lot of reasons you definitely don't want to become estrogen dominant. And Dr. Platt explains them very well. Yeah.
So moving on to our next hormone that we're going to look at, growth hormone. So talk to us a bit about that.
Yeah. So growth hormone is something like DHEA that tends to peak it's already been at its highest by 30 years old, and then it drops. It's obviously, especially at its highest when we are very young, when we're growing rapidly, and also during puberty when we're, growing in a kind of different dimension. But yeah, like from 30 onwards, it goes down a lot. And so there is a whole strategy of kind of anti-aging of taking growth hormone. But honestly, what it's usually used for in practice, in reality, because it's pretty expensive to just take actual growth hormone. It's definitely the most expensive of all the hormones we're going to discuss today. If you want to supplement with the actual hormone, which I'm not necessarily saying is a good idea, but if you did. And so it's usually used for people who want to lose weight and or gain muscle, but losing fat being the number one, thing. So as I said, if none of the other hormones are like implicated and you are just fairly old, like basically if you are very healthy, they're pretty old, you're fine with all the rest of the hormones and you just have this stubborn fat that won't go, then we might check your IGF-1 levels, which is usually what you check to see the growth hormone levels. They're probably going to be low. They're definitely going to be low compared to a 30-year-old. They might even be low compared to someone your age. And then supporting high levels of growth hormone may well make a significant difference. And I've seen that it absolutely can in those circumstances. It's definitely not my first go-to thing. If I were doing a kitchen sink approach where, I'm just throwing everything at it because someone's highly motivated, as I say, maybe there's millions of dollars on the line that they have to lose a certain amount of weight in a certain period of time, whatever, then by all means, maybe it would be something to add, although it should still be done cautiously. But it's not my go-to for the average person. But I thought I'd mention it, because it is still a factor and it is something that is commonly used and has a significant effect.
Certain natural things that, do I want to increase growth hormone as I age?
Potentially, we announced recently, I think on the podcast, that it's your 50th birthday, right?
Yeah.
So your growth hormone is not going to be as high now as, it was when you were half that age. There's absolutely no way. How much it's declined is a question. If I were you, I would not be doing anything to increase growth hormone without testing it first. The IGF-1 test is not super cheap, but it's not crazy expensive. It's actually much more commonly available in the US. Basically, the main thing that drives the cost of a test seems to be how many people take the test. And obviously, I think the reason why most tests are more expensive in the US, but IGF-1 is not one of them, is because a lot of people are testing IGF-1 in the US because a lot of people are taking growth hormone in the US. That's my guess anyway. So unless it's like really, really difficult, I would test basically, because again, you don't want your growth hormone or your IGF-1 to be too high. Having IGF-1 be too high actually can increase insulin resistance. IGF stands for insulin-like growth factor. So it competes with insulin. It's definitely not something you want to just do just because you're getting older. I would say it's definitely not something you would do just even because you're getting older and you gaining weight, but it's something that with medical supervision, if you're already addressing all the other factors that we're talking about here, might want to consider. And that's partly where I think where people get it wrong is they do it in the wrong order. So we're doing all the others first and we're doing leptin last because I tend to go on and I wanted to make sure that I cover all of them in this episode. But I would definitely look at addressing leptin, for instance, before like adding in growth hormone. Now, in terms of like natural things to do, again, like just as a cliff notes, I'm pretty sure we did an episode where I talked about growth hormone in more detail. I would generally recommend the peptides. First of all, they're much cheaper. Second of all, there's much less evidence that they will have troubling side effects. So that's like ipamorelin and CJC 1295, I think are usually the two. And they're shown to be synergistic, so taking them both together is much more effective than just taking one or the other. One's a growth hormone releasing peptide, one's a growth hormone releasing hormone. Basically, they kind of tell your body to make its own growth hormone. As I said, it's a lot cheaper and it seems to be a lot safer as well. So that's probably the direction I'd go in. For those are still injections though. So for people who don't want to inject themselves, there is something called MK677. I'm not a fan of that as well for reasons I've discussed recently on the episode of Dr. Miriam. It can make you suddenly have like an insulin spike, which then means a blood sugar crash out of nowhere, like leaving you ravenously hungry and also highly stressed and in an unpredictable way. Like it could be 8 hours later, it could be 2 hours later after you take it. So that's not great. So I don't like that aspect of it. But in terms of if you really want to increase growth hormone, you want the cheapest possible substance, and you don't want to inject yourself, that would be the way to do it. The natural way to do it would be fasting, although that has potential challenges, especially exercising while fasting, especially doing intense exercise like high intensity interval training or resistance training, that kind of thing. That will definitely spike growth hormone. And then intense heat is another one that's well known to spike growth hormone. In terms of supplements, I wasn't planning to include something that is growth hormone spiking in this concoction that I'm making, because the only thing I'm aware of that's really significantly effective is like high doses of L-arginine, which is an amino acid. When I say high doses, I'm talking about like, I think 5 grams or more, which first of all is a lot of pills. Second of all, that can reduce your body's resilience to viruses, and especially it can lead to a herpes outbreak. So I'm not a huge fan of that, but for those minority of the population who don't have any form of herpes, it's something you could consider because it is cheap and relatively side effect free to take arginine. So that's, potentially a way of doing it. So there are other things that claim to do it, but nothing I've come across is effective as the things I've just listed.
Great. So biggest takeaway, growth hormone, definitely want to test for it first. And as you previously just stated, which is why we're leaving leptin till last, you would look at addressing leptin first before addressing any of these other things. And I'm really, really interested in finding out why. So let's dig into leptin.
Yeah, I don't know if before any of the other things, but definitely before growth hormone.
Okay.
The time where I wouldn't start with leptin is where a person already has a moderate or low appetite. That's the crucial thing, because the leptin hormone, the crucial thing about it is that it is the satiety hormone. So knowing that, we might say to ourselves, well, let's test my leptin, and I'm a bit overweight, maybe my leptin is low. That's the obvious thing, but in fact, that's not the case. It actually works the opposite way. you would test your leptin and see if your leptin is high, because the problem with leptin is like the same problem with insulin. It's more the resistance that is the challenge.
Yeah, I was going to ask if there was a correlation between these two.
There's definitely a connection. I don't know if it's like any more significant than, say, the connection between insulin and cortisol, though. But it's definitely there, and all of these things are obviously connected. So this depends a little bit on who you listen to. So as a result of some of my subscribers telling me that this is a good idea, recommending it to me, I did, look into the work of Dr. Jack Kruse. I'd actually done so about a year ago or something. I'd read a bunch of articles in his website and stuff like that, and heard him speak a bit, but I wasn't super convinced. But I got into it again as a result of their recommendations, them saying, this is really a crucial thing. And so what Dr. Kruse is probably most known for these days is talking about light, right? The importance of red light, the importance of UV light. The red light thing is becoming quite ubiquitous these days. Everyone kind of agrees it's worth considering at least. UV light is a lot more controversial still, right? There's a lot of people, well, definitely the vast majority of the mainstream, who believe that it is just a damaging thing and causes skin C-word, and you just got to avoid it, or avoid it as much as possible, that at least that it ages the skin, all this kind of stuff, right? So I kind of took a look at it again, and I know that like his big, and I listened to a bunch of interviews of his. I listened to him where he spends hours and hours and hours berating Andrew Huberman, for instance.
Why is he doing that?
For his ignorance, it's kind of generally his style. Berating might not be the correct word. Someone might tell me off by that, but it's kind of like, if only you'd seen what I'd seen, then you'd realize you're wrong about almost everything, was kind of the frame that he was coming from. And let me try and explain to you how I discovered what I discovered it, and you'll realize I'm right. I guess that was more what it is. But I think Andrew Huberman took it as a berating based on some clip I saw of him discussing it after the fact. But and I think, to be fair to Dr. Kruse, I think he's right to say that a lot of, so his take on it is that 99.9% of what's taught in the medical field is dead wrong. So he's been a neurosurgeon for most of his life. He, has a bunch of celebrity clients, famous clients or whatever. He said that the only reason, so during COVID, anyone who said anything out of line with what the government told them they're allowed to say was basically silent, shut down, including RFK Jr., which is why he said initially, he said he wouldn't have ran for president if he didn't think he could win, but he also said one of the reasons he did it is because it's like illegal to censor a presidential candidate. So this is the only way he could say what he wanted to say without being censored. Anyway, Dr. Kruse said he was never censored, and he would go around saying all this crazy stuff about how this is stupid and this is madness and this is dangerous and this is life-threatening and all the rest of it. And people are like, how is he getting away with saying all this stuff when no one else can? And in his highly disagreeable style. And apparently he said it's because Jack Dorsey, who was still the head and owner of Twitter partial owner of Twitter at the time, was his client. And so Jack Dorsey had said, you're not allowed to ban Dr. Kruse. And so they didn't. And so he was the only one speaking out when no one else, maybe they would have liked to, but they just weren't able to. So that's quite interesting. So because of that, then this guy called Bukele, who's the guy who took over El Salvador and took it from the most dangerous country in the Americas to the safest, I believe. He's a bit of a maverick in terms of he loves Bitcoin, for instance, which I'm a bit more skeptical about, and all this kind of stuff. And anyway, so he started saying, well, why is this guy spouting off about COVID when no one else is allowed to? And so he got him in there to advise on it and all this. So anyway, I won't go on, but Dr. Kruse has loads of interesting stories like that. He's not just a person with an opinion. He's got a vast, as I said, history of practice of actually doing this stuff that he's talking about. And so I was like, all right, maybe I need to start taking them a bit more seriously then, because before I just, read all this stuff and, took it just as ideas without really, I guess, finding out more about the man behind them. And listening to some of the other people as well who I would say are from the same school of thought, like Alexa Cowan, who someone told me I should have a guest on this podcast. I reached out to her, no reply, but I think I can see why. I think they're both insanely busy at the moment. I think both of their public profiles just shot up in the last year because of the connection to RFK and Nicole Shanahan and all these kind of people. So he said that he was a surgeon for decades, and then I think it was 2005. Someone who worked in the pharmaceutical industry gave him a bunch of studies about leptin and told him to read a book or something. I won't repeat the whole story, but he has a whole story about it. Anyway, he went through a whole process, and as a result of it, he basically decided that leptin was the master hormone. This is the important point that I wanted to get to. So it is the hormone that is the most upstream, that regulates and then sets the stage for all other hormones and whether they are out of balance or not. So this is always a important question, right? So we talk about these different, just talked about a bunch of different hormones. It's like, it's always a bit of a chicken and the egg, right? Because they all affect each other to some degree. And so like, what is at the root of it? So for instance, fans of Ray Peat's work will often say that thyroid is at the root of it. Maybe they'll talk about, they also talk about cortisol and insulin and stuff, but I think thyroid at the root is probably, if you had to pick one, I think that might be accurate to say that that's, his belief. And if you disagree, you can put it in the comments. You can tell me why I'm wrong and give me some citations and quotes and stuff. So Dr. Kruse has a different perspective. It's this thing, leptin. So leptin's interesting. He said one of the reasons he didn't know about it is because it was only discovered in the mid-1990s. And so when he was doing his, neurosurgeon medical degree and training, it wasn't even a thing yet. It didn't exist, So it's something that's recently discovered, and also something that not a huge amount of focus had gone into up until relatively recently. Not a lot of research had gone into. Now, if I didn't misunderstand it, I think that Dr. Kruse had a conspiracy theory about this, which is basically, again, if I've got this wrong, tell me, but my understanding was he was saying that there's been this decade-long plan to ultimately get the majority of the population hooked on GLP-1 agonists like Ozempic. And part of that plan, first of all, is to flood them with high levels of blue light through these different devices that people stare at all day. And the blue light devices, so I'm talking about your phone, your computer, etc., first of all, they dysregulate dopamine, which makes people kind of a lot easier to control and a lot easier to mind control. He claimed that the insights about that first came from the MK Ultra program, which is the mind control experiments proven to be real by the CIA in the 60s and 70s. That some people say they never stopped. And so blue light helps control people through that avenue of making them dopamine dysregulated, meaning they're constantly chasing a dopamine fix. Basically, it makes you much more likely to be addictive and addicted to things, including your phone and your whatever. And then that blue light dysregulation, he said, is also a strong GLP-1 antagonist. He also talked about other things like artificial sweeteners, as well I remember, that are strong GLP-1 antagonists. And so the conspiracy, as I remember it, as I understood it, is to flood us with these GLP-1 antagonists for a long time so that we are chronically overeating. And so then when the GLP-1 agonists come out, everyone will get hooked on them because they're kind of resolving a problem that they've created. So it's that, I think it's called Hegelian dialectic, problem, reaction, solution. So the problem is everyone's becoming obese. The reaction is, oh, isn't that terrible? And the solution is, here's this wonder drug. You just got to take it and your appetite will go right back down again.
Create the problem so you can fix it.
Yes, which is kind of classic, what's the word? Dark side of the force business 101. Light side of the force is to find a problem and then find a way to fix it. But dark side is to create a problem. So, all right. So there's that. So the leptin thing. So again, as I understand it, his perspective on that is the reason it hadn't been looked into and researched and all the rest of it is because there was this big plan with the GLP-1s to create a problem and then offer the solution. And so leptin was kind of stick in the spokes. I don't know, like something that I don't know what the
It would have been
phrase
a
for it is.
disruptor for the plan in a way.
Yes, it would kind of bring the plan to potentially a screeching halt. In the same way that they claim that the reason why things like vitamin D3 or zinc or ivermectin were completely ignored when COVID hit is because they had their own treatment that they preferred that everyone take, and they didn't want you to take, the other ones that were, let's say, a lot more thoroughly researched over a much longer period of time to show their safety. So that's the theory, that's the conspiracy about why leptin is not center stage, despite it being, as I say, potentially the master regulator of all the other hormones. So then the question becomes, what dysregulates leptin? And I think because of what I just said, because there hasn't been a massive amount of research into it as there should have been, there's definitely been some, don't get me wrong, but not as much as cortisol, not as much as insulin, not as much as estrogen, etc. But my understanding is that from Dr. Kruse's perspective, the number one thing that's required for this leptin sensitivity to be restored is to bring a person back into congruence with the circadian rhythm, and to bring the circadian rhythm back into congruence with the actual light cycles of the Earth. And so basically, his take on it is that the reason why we're all obese is actually not primarily because of the foods. It's not because of the seed oils, it's not because of the sugar, it's not because we're eating too much, maybe because we're eating too much, but it's not because, of how addictive they made the food or how tasty they made the food or any of these kind of things that are often talked about. It's actually because we are cut off from, first of all, the natural cycles of light, because we have electric lighting that can be on at night. And then second of all, because we're cut off from the correct proportion of light. So meaning because the sunlight is at least 50% red and infrared light throughout the day, and it's even higher percentage red and infrared in the morning and the evening. And so, conspiracy again. So incandescent lights, which were the type that were common until relatively recent, they actually had a large proportion of red light and infrared light. And then they've decided that those lights are inefficient. Why are they inefficient? Because most of the electricity goes towards heat. But what is heat? Heat is infrared light. So, and so the LEDs, which are common these days, are much higher in blue light frequencies, and lower in red. I actually tested a bunch of them. Often they're fairly balanced between red, green, and blue, which are the three colors of actual light. The others are just combinations. But what they are definitely completely lacking in the LEDs is any UV light, and they're completely lacking in any infrared light, which is why they're energy efficient. So they're lacking in these things that are considered, as I said, UV light is still considered dangerous, even by most people in the natural health world. Red light and infrared light is now considered beneficial in most of, definitely the alternative health world, probably even to some degree in the mainstream health world. But the problem is they consider it to be energy inefficient. And so so basically during the day, we tend to get very little UV light and very little infrared light when we should be having loads of them. And then at night, we're getting still loads of blue light, and to some degree also green light and red light, when we should be having none of those, except for maybe a tiny bit of red light and infrared light, which is what we'd naturally get from like a candle or an open fire or something like that. Because we've got to remember, although our diet has changed massively in the last 150 years, our light environment has changed even more massively.
Dramatically. Yeah.
Especially if we're staring at screens all day, but honestly, just if we're indoors most of the day. And if you're in a northern climate, or I guess, if you're far away from the equator, then you probably are indoors most of the time. And to be honest, so were a lot of your ancestors, maybe to some degree, depending on practicalities. But the difference is they would not be flooded by blue light. They would, again, candles, fire, maybe an oil lamp, right? Depending on the century. Like, these are all things that are very low in blue light. The only way you would actually be able to get a significant amount of blue light until very recently is to go outside in the middle of the day. That would be the only way to get it. So the idea that we're, in contact with it the whole time. So anyway, so that is the fundamental cause of this dysregulation of leptin, and this resistance to leptin, according to Dr. Kruse, is this dysregulation with light. And so, he recommends a weight loss diet, where the crucial, he has his ideas about food and stuff like that as well, but the crucial thing to him is more that the way that you eat in coordination with the sun's natural cycles and the level of exposure you have to the sun's natural cycles. And so, obviously being outside as much as possible, but specifically being outside when the sun rises is really key. Being outside when the sun sets is really key, at least for a bit. Ideally getting contact in your skin, but at least contact through your eyes. Very much against sunglasses, because they block that ability to, get that light, which gives these signals to your brain, which creates all this hormonal and neurotransmitter cascades. And then so I think the specific thing is to get up before all the sun rises, eat within an hour of waking up, then to eat as the sun rises, ideally watching the sun, and then not snack, eat another proper meal again, whenever you're hungry, 4 or 5 hours later, eat another meal again, whatever, 4 or 5 hours later, and then don't eat, ideally once it's no longer light outside. And let's say if you're, very high northern climate where it becomes dark at 3 p.m. or something like that, then at least don't eat for like 4 or 5 hours before going to sleep. So you're going to bed at 10 p.m. Okay, maybe you can eat at 5 p.m. when it's really dark, but definitely don't be eating at like 7, 8 p.m. like a lot of people might actually do. And so the point of that, and a lot of that is advice, other than the sun, going in the sun thing, just the timing of when to eat meals and stuff is exactly what I've been saying for ages anyway, right? For maybe different reasons. In terms of eating soon after you wake up, wait quite a few hours before, if you're trying to lose weight, certainly, wait quite a few hours between having the last meal and going to sleep, and don't snack. But so basically, and again, I'm not doing it full justice. He has a book called the Epi Paleo RX. He also has his website where he shares, I think, most of this for free. I think it's the Leptin Reset Diet or something like that. So you can go and check that out. And so that's pretty cool. That's interesting that is something that seems to be working for a lot of people. But then I was also interested to discover that there are actually potentially some substances which also help with leptin resistance. And out of the ones I've tried so far, the one that has really surprised me of how effective it is a glycosaminoglycans, which is a long chain sugar, also known as a mucopolysaccharide, which is sometimes also used for joint pain and for immune system function and stuff like that. But so this combination with this glycosaminoglycans combined with hyaluronic acid, which is the stuff that they often use in skincare regimes and some of the injecting people and stuff like that. It's something that occurs naturally in the body, but I'm not a fan of injecting it. I guess that's a separate conversation. That, for some reason, seems to be very, very effective at addressing leptin resistance. I say for some reason, I'm still trying to fully understand the mechanism of exactly how it works. But I've found in the couple of people who've tested it for me that they actually find it to be more effective at suppressing appetite than Ozempic, than semaglutide.
In an ideal world, you'd meet all of your nutritional needs in the form of vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, and more from the foods you eat. However, unless you prepare all of your food at home from scratch using the highest quality ingredients possible, the reality is that most of us need some nutritional support. Most of us need to take supplements if we want to look, feel, and perform at our best on a consistent daily basis. And this is especially true if you have genes that give you an elevated need of certain nutrients. And this is where Feel Younger can help. What I love about Feel Younger is that they offer a huge range of quality supplements and healthcare products formulated and endorsed by Elwin Robinson, including must-haves like magnesium glycinate and vitamins B12, D3, and K2. And they do it at affordable prices with free shipping for orders over $50 without ever compromising on quality, purity, or potency. To learn more about how Feel Younger supplements can give your health a boost while supporting this podcast, please visit feelyounger.net and use promo code Rejuvenate to get 20% off your first order. That's promo code Rejuvenate for 20% off your first order at feelyounger.net. Interesting. So is this thing that you are talking about, and I'm going to get the name wrong, the glycosaminoglycans, is that helping reduce our leptin resistance?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes, that's the claim for it. And so, as I said, exactly how it has that effect, I'm not sure about. And I'm still trying to understand. I've seen the surface level interpretation, but it's not fully justified to me. But the interesting thing is that in studies, it works to actually reduce leptin resistance, which you'll see in terms of blood test, you'll see a drop of leptin in the person's blood. And then in terms of experiential data, you'll see that, the person's caloric intake will actually decrease. So that's the best kind of cheat for leptin that I found so far. But as I say, I'm crowdsourcing this. If you guys are aware of anything else that is something you can just take that is, safe and actually effective for restoring leptin sensitivity, then let me know. I'm sure there are more things that I just haven't discovered yet. But in the meantime, if we get away from cheating again and talk about the main thing. So the main thing is, and I think the cheating, look, some people they have to work indoors. Maybe they're saving people's lives. I mean, this is one of the criticisms of Dr. Kruse, that he lost a bunch of weight, but he still doesn't exactly look thin. And, what he put it down to is, look, I lost a bunch of weight, but then when COVID started, I started working full time in the hospital again. I had blue light shining in me all day. I was working long hours. I was stressed. I didn't get enough sleep. And, I messed up my leptin again to some degree by not following my own advice because I was trying to save people's lives. I mean, okay, obviously I haven't fact checked if that story is true, but I guess it kind of makes sense, right? If you're not following your own advice, potentially you would get worse. So it's not easy to follow this advice. Drex Schroeder, who you interviewed, who we had on recently, like he chose to live in a sunny climate, I think partly for this reason. Jack's the same, he moved to El Salvador, which is quite near the equator, in order to, have more sun contact. There is an interesting thing about carbohydrates and the sun as well that I'll just bring up while we're talking about light, which is that it does seem to be that the closer you are to the equator and the more sun you're exposed to, the more that you're actually able to handle carbohydrates without it causing a problem. All other factors being equal. Of course, there could be all kinds of other things going on. There could be, maybe genetically you're less able to handle carbohydrates and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not saying all that stuff doesn't count, but I'm just saying all other factors being equal. One of the reasons why, if you go on, like, one of my friends has just been to Thailand for a while, and he was eating lots of fruit there, and he didn't, find that he gained any weight despite he wasn't just eating fruit, he was eating all kinds of normal food and then a bunch of fruit, and, kind of everything contains sugar in Thailand as well. And he actually lost weight. And, part of it is exposure to the sun, right? There is something about when you have a lot of exposure to sunlight. And one of the mechanisms that I understand is that UV light will help your body to deplete deuterium. And so deuterium, if it builds up excessively, actually slows down mitochondrial function. So it's another, bottleneck to the thyroid hormone being effectively able to tell the mitochondria to produce enough energy. So yeah, in terms of leptin resistance, I think, as I said, in terms of cheats, it's still early days for me. But I think the fundamental thing is this connection with the life cycles of the earth. So what can you do about that in terms of practicality?
I was gonna say, just before you go into that bit, it goes to show you, like what Dr. Jack Kruse was saying, that having helped himself get to some space, COVID hits, he goes back into the environment, that how much our environment plays a role into our health and our wellness, especially the natural nature aspect of that.
100%, yeah. And, I've been focused for a long time on things like the fresh air, the pollution in the air, the pollution in the water, the food, and all the rest of it. But the light environment is an interesting thing, right? So what can we do to optimize the light environment? Well, so I think we talked about this before, so I'm just going to give cliff notes. Beyond when it gets dark outside, ideally, or at least quite a few hours before you plan to go to sleep, if you're a night owl like me, you want to block all blue light at least. And then ideally several hours before you go to sleep, you kind of want to block the yellow stroke green light as well. And so the way you would do that is either kind of kit out your house with lights that are only red, that don't produce blue or green light. But and then set your devices to also have that specific hue. But the easier way that most people are going to want to go down is just get those blue light and yellow light blocking glasses. So basically, when you put them on, everything just kind of looks red. It's a bit weird to begin with. It takes some getting used to, but it is, absolutely effective at stopping that light pollution that dysregulates your dopamine and messes up your, leptin sensitivity. So that's one thing. However, that on its own isn't enough. You also want to get actual light when it is light. That is the other thing. So if you are able to get up before dawn and follow that procedure that I just said of get up before dawn, eat, and then, prepare your food and then eat while you watch the sunrise, perfect. But at the very least, when you wake up, go outside and get some sunlight for a period of time before you then eat. Look, depending on how bright it is, like the less basically the less you're going to want to be outside, the more cloudy and rainy it is. Actually, the longer you need to be outside to get enough light. So that's a bit of a unfortunate one, but outside is the crucial thing. I remember my wife did not believe me about this, so I bought a lux meter and I showed her, look, see this bright room we're in now with all these lights, like kitchen. It's like 50 lux. And she's like, it's so gloomy outside. I said, yeah, sure. Let's go outside in this gloomy, dark, like overcast, borderline, almost rainy thing. How many lux do we have here? Like several thousand. And she's like, oh, wow. It's like, you really wouldn't think there's so much light out there, even if it's a gloomy day, but it absolutely, there is. And don't take my word for it. I think those lux meters are not expensive, $10 or $20 or something. So it's worth it to demonstrate it to yourself because you hear these things from people, but you don't know if they're true. And just to see, oh my God, yeah, there's so much more light. So getting that exposure first thing is important. Obviously, if it's a sunrise, that's way better, but anything's better than nothing. And then again, try and get outside when the sun is setting and get that exposure. Ideally, you're going out there in a bikini or a Speedo or something and getting it on all your skin. But let's face it, most people are not doing that. The very minimum is you're just getting it in your eyes and on your face. Right? That's like, like that will make a significant difference. And then if you are somewhere where getting light is just very difficult, maybe because you're doing 12-hour shifts inside where there's only blue LEDs or whatever, again, in the same way that you might supplement nutrients or you might supplement hormones, you can consider supplementing light. And so you can consider supplementing red light. I like to actually use the lamps that they use for heating up. I think they're often called chicken lamps that they use for heating up livestock. They're often not expensive, $10, $20, something like that. And just having them in the room where I am. So having all the normal lighting and then just having that as well, it actually brings it closer to natural sunlight. Because as I said, LEDs, again, all the ones I've tested, they're kind of reasonably balanced blue, green, and red. But the problem is they've got no infrared and they've got no UV. So it's completely unnatural, even during the day. And they're very weak compared to the daylight, as I just told you, the light story. So adding in a bunch of like red stroke infrared light that's just bathing the room will make it a bit more natural. So I like to have those everywhere. They're so cheap. Obviously, if you're somewhere very hot, then that's not going to work because they do heat up the room a bit. But if you're somewhere very hot, go outside into the sun, right? This is like a supplement for when it's not hot outside. Another thing is you can consider is getting a proper red light setup. You can, again, if money is a concern, just use those lights I said. You can hook up a few of them in a row. You can like maybe put them all on I think at one point, the kind of clothing racks that you can just hang a few from there and then lie underneath it for a few minutes. That's a very cheap DIY kind of way of doing it. If you have a bit of money that you're willing to put into it, then you can get one of those red light panels that is very intense. And generally they produce less heat, even though they are infrared. They're more like they specialize the therapeutic ranges. So generally you can get a lot more red and infrared light exposure from those LED devices because they're not as heating. But there's kind of debate in the light optimization world as to whether they're actually genuinely better and if they're actually worth the money. Some would say that the just general like heating lamps that we're talking about are just as good, as long as you're not like really sensitive to the heat. And then on the other end, and as I said, that's pretty uncontroversial these days, everything I've said so far. The more controversial thing is about the UV light. And so I actually have a setup for those as well now. So I have a UVB light setup and a UVA light. So the UVB light is primarily sold and used for increasing vitamin D. So that will turn the cholesterol that your body's got under the skin into vitamin D. If you have high cholesterol, one of the many reasons for that is because your body's not converting enough of it to vitamin D for you. And then you're taking vitamin D on top in a form that your body may not quite recognize. So much better to get a light that will convert the cholesterol into vitamin D for you if you can. Yes, it's definitely going to be more expensive than a bottle of pills. But if you get a good one, I think the one I've got has got like a 7-year guarantee or something like that. So, over the years, it will kind of pay for itself. It's probably actually work out cheaper than supplementing and definitely more natural. And then the UVA, I got like a secondhand sunbed set up, which is not that strong because I think the professional ones are pretty strong and that's why there's a real risk of it burning you. So that's a possibility. And the way I've set it up is I have one side UVA, one side UVB, one on each side, and then I'll just kind of turn around halfway through and get a bit on each side. Again, this is medium budget approach, I guess. The high budget, there are companies out there who will do like everything in one. I'll try and find that and give you a link to the episode. Like I saw a company that they do the red light and the infrared light and the UVA and the UVB all on one panel. So that's pretty expensive, but if you can afford something like that, hey, you can even get one for the front of you and one for the back of you, right? To do everything all in one go. Another change that I made actually, Chrissy, is to start. I only do the UV during the day now. Because
Why is that?
I've had that UVB light for like a year. I've only just got the UVA one. Because in nature, when would you ever see UV light when it's dark, right? You would see red light when it's dark because for, hundreds of thousands of years we've had access to fire, right? Whether we're talking about candles, fireplaces, campfires, or whatever. So having red light at night is not that crazy. So you could do your red light at night, your red panel, your heating lamp, whatever. But UVA and UVB, you would never get that at night. And so that's unnatural to the body and dysregulating. So I try and always, if I don't do it by the time it gets dark, then I just don't do it. And then otherwise I will do it. There's fine tuning to this. I mean, Dr. Kruse talks about how, like getting a dose of UVA and UVB like right after breakfast creates all these positive, cascade of positive hormonal neurotransmitter changes. So again, if you wanted to kind of cheat supplement, then you could consider doing that. So get up, maybe you can watch the sunset from watch the sunset through the window, but you can't actually go outside because it's 20 below or something, then you want to get a bit of UV light in your skin for those positive effects, then you could, maybe do like a home setup like I just described. And with all these things, you have to be cautious. You obviously have to be cautious of UVA and UVB because you could burn yourself. So what are the benefits of UVA? I guess I didn't touch on that just quickly. I mean, I think there are probably a lot more than I know, but the two that I'm aware of are, so number one, it stimulates melanin production, otherwise known as tanning. Melanin is a highly beneficial molecule in its own right. I'm still getting through a book on melanin, which is fascinating, but it's an antioxidant. It's actually very effective for detoxifying heavy metals. So one of the reasons why I have toxic levels of lead that I've talked about many times could be because I've had such low levels of melanin. It's very protective. Alexa Cowan talked about how your melanin is actually kind of like a reserve of antioxidant capacity. So she talks about how if you're on a plane, often people, like say on a long haul, like 12-hour flight or something like that, then you might notice you're less tanned at the end than you were at the beginning, and that's because your body has used the melanin reserves to neutralize the free radical activity from all the radiation and all the toxicity that you've had contact from. The reason I'm giving credit to her is I don't know if that's true. I'm just reporting what I've heard, so that's something to consider. In terms of other benefits that was very compelling to me was this thing about deuterium depletion for UVA. And so deuterium is this form of hydrogen, which is, again, it can get complex. Like there's theories that life on this planet wouldn't even exist without deuterium. So it's not that it's not essential, but as it gets higher and more excessive, that it blocks mitochondrial function. It's another reason why your mitochondria might not be working very well.
And you also, in our last episode where we were doing our Q&A, we had a question from one of our viewers, and you also related the deuterium aspect towards the equator and further away. Like there's also another space in there too with it.
Yes, exactly. So deuterium tends to be significantly higher in carbohydrate sources of calories than fat sources of calories. And so that's part of that theory that if you're in sunlight a lot, then you can get away with a lot more carbohydrate because your body will be able to create more deuterium depleted water. And that's lucky because if you are closer to the equator and if you're closer to sea level, then there is a lot more deuterium in all the water that you have access to. Whereas the closer you are to the poles and the higher up you are, generally the less sunlight and, well, I guess not sunlight in the case of altitude, but certainly warmth anyway, there's an infrared light you have access to, but then there's less deuterium. So basically the environments where there are higher deuterium, there's also more sunlight, which helps your body to deplete the deuterium. The areas where there is lower deuterium, there's less sunlight. There was also a mechanism whereby cold can also help to improve mitochondrial function, but I didn't come across that it necessarily leads to deuterium depletion. So my understanding is if you're somewhere very cold, it's probably either high altitude or close to the poles or both, in which case you're less effective at depleting deuterium, but you're going to be having more fat compared to carbs because that's all that's available. And therefore, you're not going to build up as much deuterium. And you're going to have less deuterium in every water source available to you. And so therefore, you're not going to build up less deuterium. So that's kind of the game of the deuterium. And it's funny, I just literally spoke today with someone who is in the deuterium business, and they sell deuterium tests and stuff. And I said to them, what's the main benefit you see in terms of deuterium? And I thought they were going to talk about energy, actually, chronic fatigue. Everyone I seem to speak to is in that milieu these days. And no, the number one thing she said is weight loss.
Really?
That's the number one benefit that people get from deuterium depleted water. That's what she said. Again, I'm doing a lot of reporting what other people have said here because I'm still quite early on this. But that was interesting. And then the second thing she said was insulin resistance. So people's insulin resistance improves with deuterium depleted water. And then I think she said like more energy as a third thing, but that was after spending a while talking about the weight loss thing. And again, it makes sense in theory, because one of the things that might stop that mitochondria from burning more energy is an excess buildup of this deuterium, which is caused by, if you're at a high carb diet with a low sunlight environment, and then not just high carb, but high calories, because your leptin is dysregulated, so therefore you're overeating. Plus, so, a lot of people these days, they get most of their calories from seed oils or omega-6s and carbohydrates. So then, actually, I've had different reporting on this. Some people say nuts and seeds are high in deuterium, some people low. That's the one area I haven't been able to see people agree. But whatever, the seed oils are definitely impacting the thyroid, slowing down the metabolism that way. Then you've got the high deuterium from the carbohydrates, and then you've got the lack of sunlight, which then makes you want to overeat and makes you produce less of the deuterium depleted water, which in turn would improve the mitochondrial function. So you can see how all of this potentially ties together. And I know this, and if all this sounds incredibly complicated, I've tried to simplify it, believe me, compared to the way some people report it. But, you can see like a bottom line is you just spend most of the time outdoors, especially exposing your skin to the outdoors, and eat food that is local to you, which, by the way, is the number one thing also that Dr. Kruse talks about, like local and seasonal food, right? So if you are in a northern climate, then, there are certain carbohydrates available to you immediately. Like in England, there's like some root vegetables, potatoes, and maybe some apples that store for a while, right? But still, generally, it's going to be a lot of fat. A lot of, your calories are going to come from animal fat, usually meat and butter and all of that kind of stuff. And certainly in terms of calories, because fat is so dense in calories, right? Um, so, and whereas if you're in the tropics, naturally there's like, carbohydrates everywhere, it's falling off the trees in front of you. It's just free and, ubiquitous. Like it's so simple and it's delicious and fresh and ripe and all the rest of it, right? So, just being outdoors a lot of the time, also fresh air, also grounding, also probably, if you're in a cold environment, it's going to make you move. Moving is good for you for all of those, reasons that we've talked about many times before, and then if you're not having artificial light at night, then you're more, what you're going to do all night if there's no light, you're going to go to sleep earlier on average, and then you're going to wake up earlier, then you're going to have the sunrise, and like basically just living in alignment with the cycles of nature, and in terms of where you are and what you eat and what you drink would resolve most of this crazily. And so, obviously I'm into the cheats because, as I say, there could be people heroically, doing surgeries all day, saving people's
Yeah.
lives.
You've got that, and you've also got people that are potentially working all the way through the night and then sleeping during the day. So, like, there are those instances. So what would somebody that's in that position, what would they do?
And the people who, they're too sick to be outside. Got a client who, severe pollen allergies and stuff like that. Like someone else, maybe it's mold, someone else it's this, that. Like some people are sensitive to sunlight, right? Like, so yes, there are a lot of reasons why potentially being outside is just not going to work, other than practicalities if it's too cold or it's raining or whatever. Well, it's all the stuff we talked about, Chrissy. It's all the cheats, right? It's like you can get UVA, you can get UVB, you can get infrared, you can get red, you can block the blue light, so it's not excessive during the day from screens. You can block the blue light totally at night by wearing the blue blocking glasses. You can get a facsimile that, like, if you look at it again as a spectrum rather than being black and white about it, like if being outside all day and eating locally and eating seasonally was like 10 out of 10, and then the way the average person is working where they barely ever see sunlight and they eat completely unnatural food is 0 out of 10, there's an argument about how far you can get while cheating, right? With all the things I just said. But, maybe you can maybe it's only 3 out of 10, maybe it's 7 or 8 out of 10. But I would say whatever, it's good enough, because a lot of people just about struggling to get by. So even if the shift is only 3 points up out of 10, that's still a massive shift. That's a massive improvement, right? And then in terms of diet, I mean, eating, like asking yourself the question, is this something that I would naturally be able to find in the environment that I'm in? So I don't know how purist you have to be about it. Like, I still buy beef from New Zealand. It's about the same climate. Beef is something that would be available and is available next door. I just prefer sometimes New Zealand beef because of its level of purity there compared to here, where everything's just so contaminated. But whatever, like, that's a debate. Maybe I'm wrong about that. But the bottom line is something that at least could be found locally at this time of year. And has it been found locally? And, could I find it locally? And if the answer is, and sorry, naturally, because obviously there's all kinds of ways to cheat. I mean, it's not just importing, but also, like, for instance, with food, they will apply these gases to it. They'll just stop them going off. So yeah, sure, you might be able to hypothetically buy, I don't know, blueberries in the supermarket in November that are actually grown in the UK. Maybe that's possible, but that's only possible probably because they're cheating in some way. Like they're doing something. Maybe they're using a hydroponic system with grow lights to grow it. Maybe they are using this gas to stop it going off as quickly as it would do naturally, or spray, or all kinds of things, right? But so it's like, let's rephrase the question again. Is this something I would have been able to find locally, naturally 200 years ago? Let's ask that question.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because one of the things I did see as well, not that long ago, was that they're gonna start adding something into cow feed to reduce the methane from the cows, and it's just like, "Well, wait a minute." Again, there's, like, more we talked about that right at the beginning of the episode about, what's going in. So, like you said, 200 years ago.
Yeah, my wife's really into that for some reason. I was like, I've been telling you about all these things that are bad about why you shouldn't be buying, like non-organic supermarket dairy for years. And she's like, oh yeah, this tipped me over the edge. She said, okay, fair enough. So now she's looking for, and basically I think in this country, if it's organic, then it doesn't have that in. And these days we're getting milk locally from the farm, which is nice, again, that we know doesn't use it. And I would recommend that to everyone, right? Cut out the supermarket middleman if you can. Um, get it locally. But despite what I just said about New Zealand beef, I also, about half the time, I buy it in this country. And everything else, I buy goat cheese and sheep cheese that's from this country. Butter is from this country. Trying to think, vegetables from this country. I don't think I eat anything that actually isn't from this country other than New Zealand beef. So I don't give the impression that I ship everything in from everywhere. Um, and yeah, and I'd recommend getting close to that, right? And being a bit proportional. So yeah, I mean, you can get honey, for instance. Let's look at a potential workaround here. You could probably get honey 200 years ago in December and eat, but in December 200 years ago, would you really be able to eat a jar a day of honey like some people are doing or whatever? Like, no, so like, be a bit kind of, reasonable. I guess this is the whole paleo approach, right? That was their idea. But as I say, it doesn't even have to be like trying to guess what your ancestors ate 50,000 years ago. It can just be, what was locally available to like your great, 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 great grandmother. That's good enough.
Yeah. And that's a good point. I mean, it's like going to those local farmers markets. If you have an option, of developing a relationship with a farmer that's up the road and those kind of things. So, yeah, locally sourced and as, close to its original form.
So as I learn more about leptin resistance and I discover more cheats that actually work, I will definitely share them with you guys. But for now, I've got, I basically shared one. Other than that, it's like doing it the right way. Either ideally, if you can, with natural light, but at least doing all the workarounds that I've shared, or as many of them as you can. Basically, probably the simplest thing would be that doesn't cost anything, is just go to your devices and set them up so that when it gets dark outside, they shift to like a red hue. That would be, the most basic one. And getting yourself some blue light blocking glasses would be the next level. Getting yourself like a $20 chicken heat lamp to, give yourself a red, infrared and red light bath at some point. And maybe you have it just in your rooms wherever you go throughout the day, like I do, or maybe you sit underneath three of them, for 10 minutes at a certain point in the day, or however you want to do it. And then, as I said, all the way to, getting those kind of panels where they've already got all the correct frequencies of lights in roughly the right proportions that kind of mimic sunlight, and getting, connecting with that every day. But You know, ideally, just ask yourself how much of it you can do naturally. That's one of the crucial things I think that you want to consider. And I do recommend checking out Dr. Kruse's work. As I said, his book is not actually, I would say, the best guide to light, like I was expecting, given that's what he's famous for these days. But it is like a guide to how to lose weight more than anything. So that's what this episode's about. So if that's what you're interested in, his book is actually good. I would recommend it for that. It's not only about weight loss, but I'd say it's the primary focus. He does have some stuff and other stuff as well, like bone and joint health and, various things. But anyway, it's not that much about light, I guess that's the point. And, his website, as I said, and check out some of the interviews with him. The ones where he's arguing with, well-known health experts like Andrew Huberman and Callie Means. That one was particularly entertaining as well, accusing them of, what's the word? Trying to misguide the general population by overestimating the importance of food and underestimating the importance of light. I thought that was quite interesting. It's funny because throughout most of my career, I have felt that food is overemphasized. I think I've said it over and over again. I've probably said it over and over again in this podcast, even, Chrissy. And I'm getting a little bit now to agreeing with the light thing. Like, I know a lot of my biggest subscribers and supporters on this channel have recommended to me. I don't know yet if it's more important than food, but it may be, because if Dr. Kruse is right about leptin being the key to all the other hormones being balanced, then it is. Because as I've just explained, those hormones, all together, they really are the key to, obesity is what we focused on in this episode, but a lot of other stuff when it comes to health. I don't think it's everything, because I don't think I have leptin resistance. I don't have the markers for it, also don't have the symptoms of it. I am easily satiated. Being underweight has always been my issue. And yet I'm not in alignment with the circadian rhythms either, as I've openly admitted many times. So I don't think it's the only thing, but I think if he may have identified like the disease of this modern age, right? Most people are overweight and obese. Most people are overeating. Most people are most people are dopamine dysregulated. Most people are disconnected from nature. Most people are disconnected from the natural light cycles, even if they maybe get up at 6 a.m. or whatever, like they're barely getting any light from the sun compared to what most of their ancestors would have done. And yeah, it could be maybe not the resolution to everything, but the resolution to the most common health challenge of this age, which is obesity and all the things that come with it, like diabetes and insulin resistance and heart disease and stuff like that.
Especially because we used to think, well, obesity or insulin resistance or those kind of things. I know specifically we're really touching on obesity here, but going back to diabetes, insulin resistance, you used to think that that was purely over for the category of people that were really highly overweight. And that is not the case anymore. So yeah, there's a lot to look into with this.
Yeah, and so one of the theories as to why it's got worse even recently, let alone in the last 150 years, is because of that switch from incandescent to LED lights. So that's relatively recent. And in fact, one of the changes, I know this is not the news show, but I just saw in the news a few days ago that the US had rescinded that mandate of everyone having to switch to LED lights. Now, incandescent lights, if people want to buy incandescent lights, they can again. So that's good. And if Dr. Kruse is right, that's a much bigger deal than most people might think. So we'll see. So, incandescent lights is just normal non-LED lights, right? They should be dirt cheap. And they're the ones that are very hot. If you leave them on for a few hours and you try and touch them, you're going to go, ow. So don't do that. So those lights that, if you're my age or Chrissy's age, you'll, easily remember, there's nothing special about them, right? And so it's switching your house back to those if you possibly can. That would be another easy step that I didn't mention up until now, but yeah, would be worth doing.
And if you guys have any interesting facts about leptin resistance, or if you have any questions, please make sure that you leave them in the comments below, and make sure you hit that like and subscribe button and that bell icon so you don't miss an episode. And we'll see you next time.
Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed that, I recommend watching our latest episode, which you can do by clicking above, and make sure to subscribe, like the video, comment, and share with anyone who you think might appreciate it. Thank you.